The final call, the station drifted on its last breath, the hull groaning as if it remembered every battle that had broken its bones. The envoy stood at the cracked viewport, his reflection thin, pale, and tired. And behind him hundreds of refugees waited. In silence, the air smelled of metal and recycled fear. The council had abandoned them. The fleets had fallen, and even the stars outside looked like cold witnesses. There was only one channel left. One frequency forbidden by every law carved into their history, a channel marked with a single word, Earth. He hesitated, his fingers hovering above the console. Stories came back from his childhood, about humans who burned worlds, about their wars that reshaped galaxies, about their silence after the Great Exodus, but now myths meant nothing. Hunger was real, loss was real, the darkness was real. He pressed the key and the message went out. Our worlds are falling, our people are dying. We call to anyone who will answer. We call to a human, for a long. While nothing came, only the hum of dying systems and the whisper of wind through cracked walls. Some said he was mad, others said no one would answer. The envoy stared until his eyes blurred and he thought, maybe they were right. Then the console blinked once, the signal steadied, and a voice cut through the static calm, low steady. This is Commander Aaron Solis of the Terran Patrol. You reached us, we hear you. We are coming. No speech, no grand promise, just that. And yet the words hit harder than thunder. The crowd stirred as if they had forgotten how to breathe. The envoy gripped the railing, trying to believe what he heard. He asked, how far, how long? And the human voice came again. One jump away. You will see a quiet light on your port side. When it arrives, do not fear the shadow, we will guide you. Outside, the raiders regrouped, their engines flaring like red wounds. They smelled weakness. The station shuddered as the first shots hit. Panels sparked. Children cried. The envoy nearly cut the channel to help the crew. But then he saw it, a soft white glow blooming in the dark, like dawn rising through dust. The raiders hesitated. The light grew stronger, and from it emerged a shape vast and silent. A Terran ship, its hull matte black, its edges trimmed with faint blue lines. It did not roar or threaten, it simply arrived, and the space around it changed. The human ship moved between the raiders and the station, blocking every line of fire. Its shields rippled with colorless strength. Missiles veered away like leaves caught in a river, and every pirate ship that tried to test its patience found itself locked in invisible grip. Their systems frozen, their engines silenced. No warning, no destruction, only stillness. The raiders fled. Those who remained drifted powerless, as if the void itself had chosen sides. Inside the station, silence turned into awe. The refugees looked at the viewport, their faces glowing in the reflection of that ship. The envoy could not speak, his throat dry as dust. The comm opened again, and the same voice said, Station Control. This is Aaron Solis requesting docking permission to assist your wounded. The envoy answered, yes, without thinking, and the word sounded like hope. Rediscovered. Minutes later, the airlock hissed open. 3 humans stepped through, tall, armored, their faces open and calm. The leader's eyes were sharp but kind. He moved without hesitation, tending to a wounded engineer beside the door. He spoke softly. We make room for everyone. Always his crew followed, placing small beacons along the walls, creating order where there had been chaos. The refugees began to move again, trusting the strangers who had crossed the stars to answer a dying call. The envoy watched Aaron coordinate everything, his tone never rising, his gestures precise. Even the children stopped crying to stare at him when one boy asked, Will you leave us? Aaron only said never. And the boy smiled as if he had heard the truth from a god. Outside, the Terran ship held its place steady as a mountain. The raiders lurked beyond sensor range but dared not return. The envoy joined Aaron in the control center and tried to speak his gratitude. But the words broke apart. The human looked at him and said quietly, Thank us later, now we get you home. We will need your codes, your best pilot, and your faith for 2 hours. Faith, the envoy whispered, and felt the words settle inside him as something he had not known he still possessed. He gave Aaron the codes called the pilot and stood by as the ship linked with the station spine, taking its weight, as if the ancient hull had found a new backbone. The stars outside seemed closer, brighter, and when the engines rumbled, The whole station felt like it was breathing. Again, the last thing the envoy saw before the jump was the reflection of that Terran ship holding them close. A shadow turned into light. He thought of the myths of monsters and conquerors, and knew they would fade now, replaced by something harder, and truer, a memory of the moment when the universe answered with a human voice saying, "We are coming," and meaning it. The convoy moved through the long stretch of empty space between the outer rings and the inner stars where no light reached, and no one sane would travel the station they had saved, now followed behind the Terran ship bound for Seoul. The envoy stood near the main viewport, staring at the silver trail left in their wake. It looked almost peaceful, though he knew peace had not. Yet come the human vessel named Horizon moved with quiet purpose, its engines pulsing like a heartbeat. Steady, confident, the refugees had been settled in the lower decks, the wounded treated and the frightened given work, so they would not drown. In fear, the envoy could feel the change in the air. The hopeless silence had turned into murmurs of belief. He watched the humans move through the corridors, their discipline almost unreal. Every action smooth, practiced, never rushed. They spoke to the aliens with respect and small smiles, sharing water blankets, food, even laughter. No one had expected laughter so soon, but humans had a way of making even survival sound like a beginning. He remembered what Aaron had said before the jump. "We are not saviors, we are responders, we just do what we can." And somehow that simple line had more power than all the speeches of kings. As the ship cruised, the envoy found himself in the observation deck, where a few of the Terran officers were talking. They spoke of the stars as if they were old friends. One woman pointed at a cluster and said that was where she was born, before the old wars took the system. And another replied softly that humans always return to what they lose. Maybe that is why. They explored. The envoy listened quietly. It struck him how calm they were, not arrogant, not afraid. Just steady people who carried strength like a natural element, like air or fire. Later, Aaron joined him at the viewport. His uniform clean, but marked. With scratches from the rescue, the envoy asked him why humans answered the call when so many others had turned away. Aaron looked at the stars for a long while before speaking. "Because once we called and no one answered," he said, "and we swore, never, to let that happen again." His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The envoy understood that behind that calm was history, made of ashes and choices. A soft alarm pulsed, the sensors showing movement ahead, a small fleet approaching fast, the pirate. Remnants perhaps, or worse. The envoy's heart raced, but Aaron only nodded to his crew and gave measured orders. Shields up forward, sensors focus on energy spikes. No weapons unless fired upon the human bridge filled with soft hums and precise voices. No panic, no shouting. It was like watching a storm handled by people who had seen storms before. The approaching ships hailed a broken signal, crackling through static, demanding surrender. The envoy waited for Aaron to answer. Instead, Aaron transmitted coordinates of a safe corridor and said, "Leave now, or be disabled." The enemy laughed through the comm until they saw Horizon shift its hull plates. The Terran ship opened ports that glowed with soft blue light. Not as threat, but as promise. The pirates fired first. 3 bursts of plasma arced through the void and vanished before touching the shield. Their energy dissolved like rain on stone. Horizon answered with beams that did not explode. They simply reached out, touched the enemy hulls and froze them in place, turning engines into glass. The envoy stared. He had never seen such control. No death, no waste. The remaining ships fled, scattering into the black, their signal fading. Aaron turned to his officers and said, "Resume course at 1/2 thrust. We do not chase cowards, we protect travelers." His tone made the word protect sound sacred. When calm returned, the envoy asked, "Why not destroy them? They will come again." Aaron replied, "Maybe, but destruction teaches nothing. Sometimes mercy teaches faster." The envoy felt something twist inside him because mercy was not a word he had heard in years. He thought of how his own leaders had burned villages just to prove they were strong. He thought of how strength had become cruelty dressed in armor, and he realized how different these humans were. They carried weapons capable of rewriting the sky, yet they used them like surgeons, not butchers. Days passed, the convoy moving closer to the Seoul relay each hour, bringing more life back to the refugees. Children began to draw stars on the walls of the mess deck, naming them after the humans who helped them. A A mechanic from the station started fixing broken drones for the Terran crew. Laughter returned like music, faint but real. The envoy wrote daily reports, but he stopped sending them to his old government. He knew they would twist his words. He began instead to record for himself, not as an envoy, but as a witness. Aaron spent his time between bridge and infirmary, always listening, always working. Sometimes he would stop by the observation deck and just stand there silent. The envoy noticed the human commander never looked tired, yet his eyes carried the depth of someone who had seen too much one evening. The envoy asked if he ever regretted answering calls like this. Aaron smiled faintly. Regret is for those who can afford to stand still. He said, "We move forward. That is the only way to keep from breaking." When they reached the edge of Terran space, the sensors picked up an enormous gate of light. The envoy had seen stargates before, but none like this. It shimmered like liquid glass, vast enough to swallow a planet. Horizon slowed as codes were exchanged. The Terran symbol flashed green across the console. Permission granted. The envoy looked out and saw hundreds of ships moving in perfect lines, all Terran, all silent like an orchestra tuning for something great. For the first time since the fall of his homeworld, he felt not fear but wonder as the convoy entered. The gate, the stars stretched into rivers of white. The envoy closed his eyes and thought of the message that had begun it all. The forbidden call sent into the dark when no hope was left. And now as the engines hummed around him, he realized hope had not answered from above. It had walked in human form, steady hands, steady hearts, quiet voices that said, "We hear you," and kept their word. The jump ended in silence, the kind of silence that followed creation itself. Stars returning from long streaks into sharp lights and the hum of the engines fading into a calm heartbeat. The envoy stood near the viewport as the gate behind them collapsed into distance. He had expected some sign of triumph or celebration, but the humans did not cheer. They moved with quiet precision, logging data, repairing minor burns, securing the refugee pods as if they had done this 1,000 times before. And maybe they had. The horizon glided forward into the first Terran sector, a stretch of dark velvet space, filled with patrol beacons, each marked with a blue circle symbol that the envoy had learned to recognize as Earth's oath of protection. The refugees murmured at the sight. They had never seen order without chains. The envoy walked through the decks, noticing how the humans shared everything. No ranks that separated, worth only responsibility. Aaron Solis worked beside engineers, lifting damaged panels, adjusting reactor settings. His uniform smudged with grease and dust. The envoy tried to help, but the commander only smiled and said, "You have already done more than enough. Your people held out long enough for us to find you. That matters." The envoy wanted to answer, but words seemed too small for what he felt. He realized humans had power, yet used it with a gentleness that made it even more terrifying. 3 hours later, the alarm sounded again. Not a raid, not pirates, but a distress call echoing through the Terran channels. The message was fragmented. A civilian freighter under attack. Near the asteroid belts, Aaron did not hesitate. He rerouted Horizon and ordered medics to ready the bays. The envoy followed him to the bridge as the starfield shifted, the human officers reading coordinates with hands that never trembled. The speed of their response left the envoy speechless when they arrived at the scene. The freighter was burning, its engines dead. Its escort gone, scattered wreckage surrounded it like a floating graveyard. A pirate formation loomed nearby, trying to pull survivors. As shields, Aaron gave one command: open hails on all frequencies, stand down and evacuate. "Now we will not fire first." The pirates did not answer. Instead, they fired a barrage of kinetic rounds, bright streaks cutting through Space Horizon's shields, flared white for a second, then absorbed the impact. The Terran gunners did not retaliate. Aaron's voice remained level. Hold. Fire target their weapons, not their hulls. Disable, not destroy. Horizon answered with beams that sliced through engines without killing any lives. The envoy stared as enemy ships lost power one by one, trapped but alive. When the last pirate vessel drifted powerless, Aaron ordered rescue drones to extract their crews too. His officers hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then obeyed with silent trust. The envoy could not believe what he was seeing. These humans rescued even those who had tried to kill them. The freighter survivors cheered as they were pulled aboard, but even the captured pirates were treated with medical care. A medic explained to the envoy that every being saved meant one less grudge and one more chance at peace. It was logic, not weakness, and somehow that made it even more frightening. Later, when the refugees from the freighter joined the station survivors, the envoy sat in the mess hall listening to them speak about Earth. They described oceans larger than worlds, forests older than empires, a planet that still dreamed while its children walked the stars. One woman showed him a hologram of a blue horizon and said, "This is what we fight for, not to conquer, not to rule, but to keep this alive." The envoy realized then that humans were not driven by conquest. They were driven by remembrance. They carried the memory of home like fire in their veins. Aaron found him there and sat across the table, no ceremony, no distance. He asked the envoy what he thought of humanity. Now the envoy hesitated and said, "Your people frighten me, Commander, because you wield mercy like a weapon." Aaron smiled. "Slightly, that is the only weapon that lasts," he said. Then his eyes turned distant. "The war that took our first colonies taught us the price of hate too well. When you lose everything, you stop chasing revenge, you start building bridges." The envoy nodded slowly, feeling the truth in every word. When night cycle came, the ship dimmed its lights and the stars shone through the transparent panels above the sleeping decks. The envoy could not rest. He walked to the observation hall again and found one of the human officers painting something on the glass, tiny constellations glowing softly. She told him it helped her remember which systems she had saved. The envoy asked if she ever tired of saving people who would not thank her. She said never, because one grateful soul outweighs 1,000 blind eyes. He did not understand at first, but later when he saw the children of the refugees watching the stars and laughing, he finally did. The next day, Horizon docked with a repair outpost near the border. Aaron arranged supplies for the rescued ships and new routes for the refugees before departing. As they prepared to leave, the envoy stood by the loading ramp watching Terran Marines distribute food crates to the station dwellers who had come to help. He saw one of them hand a ration pack to a pirate prisoner without a hint of disgust, and he thought, this is why they cannot be beaten. They fight wars but refuse to become what war makes of others. When Horizon departed again, the envoy stood beside Aaron on the bridge looking at the endless stars, and he said, "I think I understand now why you answered the call. Humans do not wait for permission to do good." Aaron did not reply. He only watched the stars and then said softly, "The galaxy forgot how to care. Someone has to remind it." The envoy nodded as the ship vanished into the next jump, and the light swallowed the dark once more. The Horizon emerged from the next jump into a region known only in maps as the Grave Orbit, a belt of dead moons and drifting relics from wars older than memory. No signal reached cleanly here, no laws applied. The void was thick with echoes and broken hulls spinning forever like silent ghosts. The envoy felt a pressure in his chest, the kind that came before storms. Aaron Salas stood at the center of the bridge, studying the hollow readings, his crew scanning for ambush patterns. They had received faint signals from a Terran scout that vanished 2 days ago, and now the ship's transponder flickered somewhere among the wrecks. The silence of the bridge was heavy, yet it was not fear, it was focus. Every Terran officer moved as if bound by the same thread, their fingers gliding across consoles, their voices steady, short-measured. The envoy watched them with awe. He remembered how his own fleets would crumble under pressure because their leaders shouted commands born of panic. Here the calm itself was the command. Aaron's eyes fixed on the largest derelict ahead. A moon cracked in, half its core glowing faint red like an ember. He said quietly, "That is where they are waiting." Within minutes the traps unfolded, a dozen ships uncloaking from behind the debris, their engines flaring cold blue. The symbols on their hulls belonged to the same empire that had once ruled the envoy's world. They had come to finish what the pirates could not do. The first volley hit Horizon's shields like thunder, but the human ship absorbed it, the hull rippling with contained energy. The crew held positions, no shouts, no chaos. Aaron raised one hand and said, "Release counterfield level 2, stabilize, spin, and drift with them." The envoy felt the ship change its movement, no longer straight but graceful, turning slowly with the wrecks, pretending to be dead among the dead. The enemy swept forward, thinking Horizon crippled, but humans played long games. They waited, letting the attackers draw closer until every hostile vessel entered the field. Aaron nodded once, and the tactical officer triggered the hidden pulse. The debris field erupted in sudden light. Not fire, but a net of magnetics weaving through space like living threads. It seized enemy engines, froze their targeting systems, and for a heartbeat the battlefield stood still. Even time seemed to pause. Then Horizon moved the ship, rolled like a living thing, its weapons flashing. Not to destroy, but to disarm, each beam slicing through cannons, leaving hulls intact. The Envoy could feel the difference between violence and control. It was surgical. It was terrifying, yet even victory carried cost. A shockwave from a detonating reactor hit them broadside, throwing systems into overload. Lights died. Gravity flickered. The Envoy crashed against a console, blood at his brow. Aaron was already up, shouting damage reports, still steady, though the smoke around him shimmered. The engineers called back. "We lost navigation array and half of power grid." The human commander nodded. "Get it back online. Within 15 minutes, we cannot linger here longer than that." The Envoy staggered to his feet, trying to assist, but Aaron stopped him, saying firmly, "Your duty now is to survive and to remember this. Do not waste strength on panic." Horizon limped toward the shadow of the split moon, using its crust as cover as repair drones poured from its sides like silver insects, patching ruptures in real time through the viewport. The Envoy saw the wreck of the missing scout drifting lifeless, a broken shell. Aaron ordered a team to recover its black box, but before they could reach it, the sensors screamed an object moving fast from below, too late to evade impact. The collision shook the decks, alarms howled, flames burst from a ruptured corridor. Humans and aliens ran together, hauling cables, sealing hatches. The Envoy followed medics to the wounded section and saw something he would never forget. A young Terran officer pinned under wreckage, still directing others even as blood spread under her armor. She saw the Envoy and smiled faintly, saying, "Tell my captain we are still holding." He could not answer her. She died before he found words. Aaron reached the section. Moments later, his face unreadable. He knelt beside her, closed her eyes and stood, without looking back, saying quietly, "She held the line that will be remembered." His voice was not broken, but every syllable carried weight. The Envoy understood that grief for humans was not weakness. It was promise. They built strength upon loss, not in spite of it. As systems came back online, the enemy regrouped outside the magnetic net. More ships arriving this time, larger carriers and cruisers. Aaron looked at the tactical map, his expression turning cold. "We cannot win this head-on," he said. "Prepare Echo Protocol." The Envoy asked what that was, and Aaron replied, "It is what we use when we are outnumbered but never outwilled." He ordered the release of dozens of drones, each carrying mirrored signal beacons. They scattered, forming false echoes that painted hundreds of phantom Terran ships across the enemy sensors. Confusion spread. The Empire's fleet hesitated, firing into empty space. Horizon used that heartbeat of chaos to slip beneath the largest carrier and unleash a surge of EMP. At point-blank range, the entire grid of the attackers went dark. Engines screaming, Horizon turned and fled into the lower orbits, dragging the refugees' ship in tow. Aaron's calm voice echoed through the decks, saying, "All units prepare for blind jump. We have no coordinates, but we will make them on the way." The Envoy braced himself as space tore open once more, the stars bending, the ship groaning, as if the universe itself resisted their escape. When light returned, they were far from the grave, orbit systems flickering but alive, the survivors cheering softly, exhausted. Aaron stood at the helm, shoulders straight, eyes tired. He said softly, to no one in particular, "We lost too many, but we kept the promise." The Envoy stood beside him, silent, knowing that promise was everything he had left. He looked out at the endless dark ahead and realized that humans were not immortal, but they fought as if they had borrowed eternity itself to keep others alive. The Horizon drifted through the edge of unknown space, its engines still whispering after the blind jump system strained, crew weary but alive. The refugees aboard carried quiet awe and grief in equal measure. The Envoy stood near the viewport, watching streaks of dust and faint stars slide past the glass. He could still hear the echo of battle inside his head. The faces of the dead. The calm of the living. Aaron Solace had not rested since the fight at the grave orbit. His uniform torn, his eyes hollow, but his voice remained steady, like an anchor in endless storm. They had escaped, yet the silence that followed was not peace. It was the waiting breath between storms. The comm systems flickered with partial transmissions, fragments of words spreading across the outer colonies, whispers of the Terran rescue spreading through broken channels as hope often does quietly. And fast the envoy knew the message would reach worlds still under Empire control. Worlds where people hid their faces when they spoke of Earth, he wondered. If that hope would bring them salvation or punishment. Aaron called for him to join the bridge. The humans were working on a broad transmission, something larger than a distress beacon. It was a declaration. The commander turned to the envoy and said, "We cannot fight every battle, we do not have the fleets for that, but words travel faster than ships if we send this. Maybe we start something that even we cannot stop." The envoy listened as the human technicians shaped the message line by line. It was not a threat, it was an oath. Humanity's voice offered to every world in chains. The message was simple. The humans promised three things. First, that any who sought refuge would find protection. Second, that any trade done in honesty would be honored. Third, that no ruler had the right to silence another people's voice. The envoy stood beside Aaron as he recorded it, his tone calm and measured like a promise carved in stone. He ended the transmission with a phrase that would burn through the stars. "We came once to conquer. Now we come to stand beside no more empires, only choices." When the broadcast went live, the frequencies trembled across systems old and new. The Empire tried to jam it, but the Terran encryption broke through their barriers. Like sunlight through thin clouds, soon voices from dozens of worlds answered small signals. At first, then stronger, one from a mining colony, another from a merchant convoy, even from old warships that had once served the Empire, now turning away, refusing orders. The envoy could see it on the screens like sparks across darkness. But not all who heard welcomed it. The Empire declared the Terran fleet an enemy of order, and sent bounty fleets to hunt them down. Aaron knew this would happen yet. His eyes held no regret. He said softly, "Then let them come. Every fleet that turns to chase us will show the others what fear truly looks like when faced with conviction." In the lower decks, the refugees gathered, listening to the echoes of the broadcast. They spoke of new names for their children, names from Earth, ones they had only heard in stories. They painted symbols of the Terran circle on the walls, with oil and dust, as if marking their rebirth. The envoy walked among them, feeling a strange weight in his chest. It was not sadness. It was belonging, something he thought he had lost forever. Days later, they reached a sector filled with drifting colonies. Abandoned long ago, the Empire had stripped it of everything but its bones. Aaron ordered Horizon to stop there. He told the crew and the envoy, "This will be our rally point. We rebuild here and we wait for those who hurt us." The crew got to work deploying drones, restoring life support, and hollow shells of stations. They brought light where only echoes had existed. The envoy helped carry supplies. He noticed that humans treated even broken metal with care, as if every ruin deserved a second chance. Within a week, the first ships began to arrive, small transports, fighters, merchant, freighters. Their hulls scarred, their crews weary. They had heard the oath and answered one by one. They pledged themselves not as soldiers, but as free travelers, willing to stand with Earth. The envoy met one captain, an alien whose world had been burned by the same empire. He said, "I was told humans were devils. Now I see they are the only angels who come armed." Aaron smiled faintly and replied, "We are neither devils nor angels. We are what the moment needs us to be." As more allies joined, the outpost grew into a beacon. Ships came not for conquest, but for connection. Trade began between species that once hunted each other. Food, medicine, data. The envoy walked through the growing station and felt history shifting under his feet. The Empire's grip was weakening, though its army still ruled half the sky. One evening, Aaron gathered the leaders of the Allied crews around a long table made of welded scrap. The envoy sat beside him. Aaron placed a simple metal tablet in the center, engraved with the Terran symbol and words in many tongues. It was the Starborn Charter. He said, "This is not a treaty of conquest. It is a promise between equals. We will protect one another, share knowledge, and keep the peace. No world will kneel again." The envoy looked around at faces of dozens of species and realized something profound. The Terrans had built an empire not of rule, but of trust. As they signed the charter, a bright alarm broke through the room. A signal from deep space. One of the defected fleets was under siege near the last Empire gate. The council turned to Aaron, who simply said, "Then we go together." Engines roared, ships lifting from the dock, lights cutting across the newborn alliance. The envoy felt the vibration of destiny in every hum of power. He knew the next battle would not be for survival alone. It would decide what the galaxy would become. He looked at Aaron and said softly, "Whatever happens now, they will remember who answered the final call." Aaron nodded, eyes reflecting. The stars then let us remind them what humans do when hope needs a home. The Allied fleet formed around the horizon like planets around a sun, ships of every shape and color, moving together under the same rhythm, banners of dozens of worlds flickering. On comm screens, some hand-painted, some barely holding together, the envoy watched from the bridge as they moved toward the coordinates of the last Empire gate. It was a massive ring structure floating in a dying system, its core glowing with the kind of light that could burn a world in seconds. That gate had once been a trade route, but the Empire had turned it into a weapon, using its pulse to destroy entire fleets. Aaron stood in silence as the projection of the gate shimmered above the table, his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. The humans had called the plan the siege without surrender, but Aaron's tone when he explained it was calm, almost gentle. They would not attack the gate. They would protect the refugees trapped within its perimeter and disable the weapon without destroying it. His officers questioned the risk. If the pulse activated, no ship would survive. But Aaron simply said, "We fight to build, not to erase." The envoy felt the truth of those words, yet part of him wondered if mercy could still stand against such power. When they reached the edge of the system, the sensors filled with motion. The Empire had gathered everything it still controlled, hundreds of warships arranged like a wall of iron. Their signal filled the comm channel, demanding the humans surrender their charter, their oath, and their allies. Aaron let them speak, then answered in the same even tone. "We will surrender nothing. We offer peace again to those who still remember what it means." The reply came in the form of fire. The stars flared with missiles, beams, and plasma, the void turning into a storm of color. The horizon moved forward, cutting a path through chaos, its shields absorbing hit after hit. The envoy gripped the console as the ship shook, but no fear reached him anymore. The bridge crew worked like one mind, every command answered before it was spoken. The Allied ships followed, forming a living wave that pushed back with precision. Drones released energy nets to block the gate's power feeds while medships darted through the lines, pulling wounded from wreckage. Humanity led from the front as always, not from safety, but from fire, amid the storm. The envoy saw something extraordinary through the viewport, an Empire cruiser disabled and spinning into the void. Human rescue pods launched toward it, not to finish it, but to save the survivors. The Empire gunners who had tried to kill them minutes ago. The envoy could barely understand it, but he knew it was no trick. Mercy had become the weapon that broke the Empire's will. Then the gate began to glow, its core building energy faster than any known reactor. If it fired, the entire system would vanish. Aaron's voice carried through every ship, steady and clear. "All hands focus on the gate drone's target. Emitters, pilots form shield line around refugees. No one leaves anyone behind." The horizon climbed toward the core of the ring engines, screaming, hull burning from radiation. The envoy saw flames crawl along the deck, but the crew kept working. One engineer fell, another took their place without pause. The bridge darkened as the energy reached peak. The human ship was too close now to escape. Aaron turned to the envoy, his expression strangely calm. "If we fail, this will be our last light," he said. "But if we succeed, this gate will not destroy anymore. It will connect worlds again." He handed the envoy a data chip. It contained the full copy of the Starborn Charter. "If I fall, make sure they know why we fought." The envoy took it wordless, his hands shaking. The gate fired, the sky tore open, but instead of annihilation, a burst of blue light spread outward, not in destruction but in resonance. The Terran drones had managed to alter the core pattern at the last second, turning the pulse into a stabilizing wave that shut down every Empire weapon in range one by one. Ships went dark. Not dead, just silenced the Empire. Fleet hung motionless, their power broken by their own machine. Horizon drifted inside the light, its hull glowing as systems overloaded. Alarms blared, but the human voices stayed calm. Repair teams moved medical to sections 3 through 9, seal decks, and hold position. When the light faded, the gate was no longer a weapon. It was a bridge. Its core stable, its energy harmonized, the Envoy looked out and saw thousands of ships from every species rising from the darkness, drawn to the glow. Aaron gave the final order. Cease fire, send rescue coordinates to all vessels. Even enemy craft, send them home. The Empire commander, who had led the assault, appeared on the comm. His face, pale, eyes wide. You could have destroyed us, he said. Why did you not? Aaron answered, because we came to end fear, not replace it. Hours later, the battlefield turned into a field hospital, drones and medics, crossing between ships, no one distinguishing friend from foe. The envoy walked among them, helping where he could. He saw pirates helping soldiers, aliens who had never spoken to humans carrying Terran stretchers, and for the first time he felt the war ending not through force but through exhaustion and grace. Aaron stood on a damaged platform overlooking the gate. His armor scorched his hands, bleeding, but his gaze steady. The envoy joined him, saying softly, "You turned a weapon into a bridge." Aaron smiled faintly. "That is all humans have ever done. We take broken things and make them cross the impossible." The stars above were quiet now, the Empire fleet drifting powerless, the gate humming like a heart reborn. The envoy looked at Aaron and asked, "What now?" The human commander said, "Now we begin again." Then he looked at the endless expanse and added, "Tell them when you return to your council that Earth remembers, and that remembering is stronger than fear." The envoy nodded, clutching the data chip close, knowing that the story of this day would change every world that heard it, and as Horizon's engines reignited, he felt that humanity had truly become what legends had promised. Not conquerors, not saviors, but builders of light in the darkest night. The war was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any explosion. The stars hung still over the broken system. Their light cold and endless ships drifted with engines dormant, their crews tending to wounded and counting. The gate that once promised death now shone like a blue heart, its rings spinning slowly. The envoy stood at the edge of the Horizon's observation deck, his reflection caught in the glass below him. Repair drones swarmed the hull, fixing burn scars from the battle. Everywhere he looked, he saw survival, not victory. Aaron Solis moved quietly through the ship's corridors, speaking to every crew member, not as a commander, but as one of them. His armor still scorched, his movements careful, from exhaustion. Yet his eyes steady. When he reached the bridge, the officers straightened without orders. The man had earned their loyalty not by command but by example. The envoy followed him and saw that the Terran flag projected above the console had been dimmed to half-light, a sign of mourning for those lost in the fight. The Empire had fallen not in fire but in silence. Their leaders gone, their fleets surrendered their soldiers, laying down arms across dozens of systems. The news spread. Like dawn, slow and unstoppable worlds that had known only obedience began sending messages of freedom and confusion, asking what would come next. Some feared a new empire rising under the Terrans, but Aaron refused the title of ruler when the Allied captains offered it. He said firmly, "Earth will not replace chains with new ones. We will teach them to walk alone, and then we will step aside." The envoy heard those words and felt something he had never seen in any conqueror: humility. Over the following weeks, the fleet turned from soldiers to builders. They ferried supplies to ruined colonies, set up hospitals on moons that had once held prisons, converted warships into cargo haulers and relief stations. Aaron refused to let his people rest, while others still suffered, and yet he never spoke of glory. He simply said, "We started this with a promise. We finish it the same way." The envoy began to see that this was not just victory. It was transformation. The gate became the center of that new beginning. Its once deadly core now stabilized by Terran engineering. It linked systems together that had been isolated for generations. Soon convoys of civilian ships began passing through, carrying refugees and traders. The first to cross safely were the children of the fallen soldiers, both human and alien, holding hands as they stepped into the light. The envoy stood there watching them with a tightness in his throat. He thought of his own people scattered across ruined worlds and realized the future was calling. When the first council met near the gate, it was held aboard a neutral platform built from fragments of every Allied ship. Aaron arrived last, refusing to sit at the head of the table. Instead, he stood beside the envoy who had been chosen as the voice for the liberated systems. The hall was filled with faces of every kind, some scarred, some fearful, some hopeful. The envoy presented the Starborn Charter, The data chip Aaron had given him the day of the siege. He placed it on the table and said in a voice that carried across the room, "We called for a human when no hope was left, and humanity answered not with power, but with protection. We were saved, not conquered, and so this charter will be our bond." The delegates listened. As he read each line, the promise of equal trade, open travel, shared defense, no slavery. No silence when the last word was spoken. The hall stayed quiet for a long moment. Then one by one they began to sign the document. Aaron watched without speaking until the final signature was made. Then he looked at the envoy and said softly, "Now it belongs to all of you." After the council, the envoy asked him what he would do next. Aaron smiled faintly. "I will go home for a while," he said. And when the envoy asked if Earth would celebrate, he shook his head. "Earth does not celebrate victory, only peace," the envoy nodded, knowing that those words would live longer than any banner. As the fleets dispersed, the Horizon prepared for its final return to Sol. The refugees who had lived aboard it lined the corridors to say goodbye. Some cried, others stood in silence. Aaron walked through them, shaking hands, sharing quiet words. The envoy walked beside him, feeling the weight of ending and beginning blending into one. When they reached the docking bay, the envoy paused, looking out at the stars that had once terrified him. Now they looked different, not endless but open. He turned to Aaron and said, "The galaxy will remember you." The human commander looked back with a tired smile and said, "Then make sure they remember us, not me, because one voice never wins alone." The envoy nodded, unable to answer. The engines came alive, a soft hum spreading through the deck. Horizon rose from the bay and joined the fleet as it moved toward the blue glow of the Sol Gate. The envoy watched from the viewport as the ships vanished one by one into light, the Terran vessel last to leave, its thrusters painting silver trails across the dark when the final shimmer faded. Only the hum of the new gate remained echoing like a heartbeat across the void. Years later, when the envoy returned to his restored homeworld, he found statues not of generals or kings, but of ordinary humans. The medic who had saved lives in the grave orbit, the engineer who had died sealing a hull breach, the captain who turned a weapon into a bridge. People spoke of them not as gods, but as reminders of what courage looked like in silence. On a quiet night, the envoy stood beneath the sky and saw a soft glimmer moving between the stars, the signal of the Terran patrol still watching, still keeping the oath made long ago. He closed his eyes and whispered, the words that had started everything when no hope was left. We made a final call to a human and the universe answered. The Horizon drifted through the calm of space, its engines a low hum carrying the weight of countless lives saved and countless stories begun. The envoy stood at the observation deck watching distant stars stretch into threads of silver light. Every planet, every moon that had once been silent or broken now hummed with life as humans and allies worked together to rebuild and connect worlds. The Terran ships moved like quiet guardians, weaving through the void, guiding refugees, transporting supplies, teaching those who had forgotten how to care. One by one, the Empire fleets that had once threatened death now floated powerless, some surrendering without fight, some learning to follow the oath rather than commands. Aaron Solis walked the decks quietly, speaking to crews not with orders, but with questions, and listening to the answers. He never boasted of victory, only reminded everyone that they had kept their promise, that they had chosen protection over destruction and mercy over hatred. The envoy followed him silently, feeling the truth in the commander's words. The Starborn Charter, now carried by every allied ship, was not just paper or data. It was a living promise, woven into the hearts of hundreds of worlds. It was proof that when hope was gone, humans would answer, and the universe would remember. The fleets began to disperse through newly stabilized gates, each jump carrying people who had once feared annihilation, now stepping into futures they had not thought possible. Trade and travel resumed across systems that had once been closed by fear. The envoy watched ships with alien crews leaving in convoy, escorted by Terran Marines who moved with patience and care, teaching and protecting rather than conquering. The light from the stargates spilled across the void, painting paths for travelers. The envoy could feel the weight of history being rewritten, one calm action at a time. Aaron stood at the Horizon's bridge, looking toward the blue shimmer of the Sol Gate. The envoy approached him quietly. "Commander, what will you do now?" Aaron turned his eyes to the stars that had once seemed endless and terrifying and said, "We go home for a while. We rest, and then we watch. We keep the promise and make sure no world forgets how fragile hope can be, and how strong it becomes when someone answers the call." The envoy nodded, understanding that the act of answering was greater than any battle won or lost. It was a seed planted in the hearts of all who had seen it. As the horizon moved through the gate towards Sol, the envoy looked down at the Starborn charter in his hands. The words felt heavier and lighter at once. Heavier because they carried the weight of lives, and lighter because the promise had already begun to bloom across the galaxy he thought of. The children drawing constellations on the walls of refugee stations, of medics helping pirates, of engineers repairing broken stations, of families boarding ships for the first time in decades. And he realized that humanity's greatest power was not firepower or fleets, but the ability to choose life over death even when no one else would. The stars stretched and curved around them, the silence of space now filled with possibility and not dread. The envoy turned one last time to Aaron, whose eyes reflected distant suns and the blue glow of the gate, and said softly, "The universe will never forget this. Humans have changed everything." Aaron smiled faintly and said, "Then let them remember that hope does not wait for anyone. It only moves. When someone answers it." The envoy held that thought as the horizon's engines pulsed and carried them forward into the endless night, with light trailing behind them like a promise. The galaxy had seen death and fear, it had seen despair and silence, and then it had seen the call answered by humans, and the echoes of that choice would carry farther than any weapon, farther than any empire. It would carry into every heart and every mind the Starborn charter would live, and every star along the way would remember the day when hope returned because one human answered the end.